me set the scene. 20,000 years ago, the Arabian Peninsula was full of grasslands, rivers, and wildlife. But as the Ice Age ended and the climate shifted, the land dried out. Rivers disappeared, leaving behind just their ghost outlines in the sand. The animals left, and so the people had to adapt, which is where our story begins. The people moved into mountain valleys and oases, figured out agriculture, domesticated animals, and built permanent settlements. And from those settlements came language, writing, trade, civilization. Among these things, one stands out the most: trade. The Arabian Peninsula sat smack in the middle of the ancient world. Egypt to the west, Mesopotamia to the north, India and Persia to the east. That means every major civilization at the time needed to pass through or trade with Arabia. Whether that's frankincense, myrrh, spices, almonds or dates, there were always massive caravans carrying these goods through the peninsula constantly. But because Arabia can be accessed from practically all angles, they need some sort of protection. Though it might not be what you expect. There weren't towering gates or hundreds of troops on 24/7 watch. There was only sand surrounding the peninsula. It served as a natural wall that kept invaders out, while everyone else's empires collapsed around them. Then in the year 610, everything changed. A merchant from the city of Mukur, which you probably know as Mekur, received what he believed was a revelation from God through the angel Gabriel. His name was Muhammad, and a few years later, he had unified the warring tribes of Arabia under one faith. By 630, his followers had retaken Mukur, facing barely any resistance. Within the first century of Islam's birth, the Islamic Empire stretched from Spain all the way to the borders of China. But you might not know this. The Arabs spread more than just religion. They also spread science, mathematics, medicine, and philosophy. I mean, who knew they pioneered algebra? I didn't. They also encountered and translated Indian mathematical texts into Arabic, which later on spread to the rest of the world. Yes, I'm talking about the Arabic numerals, the number system that we use on a day-to-day basis. But you know by now empires don't last forever. By the 17th century, the Islamic Empire had fractured. Arabia went quiet again, and the political centre of the Muslim world had long since moved elsewhere. Despite that, the pilgrims still kept coming to Mukur and Medina, and the peninsula remained the heart of a faith followed by hundreds of millions. But deep in the desert, a new alliance was brewing that would change the modern world forever. By the 1700s, a religious scholar named Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab was pushing hard for a return to what he saw as the pure, original form of Islam. Well, safe to say the local powers were not a fan, so eventually he was chased out and persecuted. Luckily, he found refuge with a ruler named Muhammad bin Saud in a town called Diriyah, and the two men struck a deal. One would provide religious authority, and the other military power. From that agreement, the first Saudi state was born. Let me tell you, it grew pretty fast. Some might argue too fast. By the early 1800s, it controlled most of the peninsula, and the Ottoman Empire, who was watching from the north, got really nervous. So in 1818, they, meaning the Ottomans, sent an army with artillery, besieged Diriyah, destroyed it completely, and dismantled the Saudi state. But the Al Saud family was still standing strong. And by 1824, they were back on track. They set up a new capital in Riyadh and built the second Saudi state. Then they expanded. Once again, the Ottomans came back. This time around, they had help from the rival clan, the Ahl Rashid family, who eventually drove the Saudis out of Riyadh entirely. The Saudi ruler at the time, his name was Abdul Rahman. He fled into the desert with practically nothing. Eventually, he ended up in Kuwait with his young son, Abdulaziz. This name is important because this little boy was not playing around. See, in 1902, Abdulaziz, who, mind you, was barely in his 20s, took a small expeditionary force toward Riyadh, snuck into the city with just 15 of his best men for a dawn raid, stormed the Musmak fortress and took the city back. I know it sounds a lot like a wild action scene from a movie, but actually this was real life. And over the next 30 years, he conquered the rest of the peninsula, united the tribes, and on September 23rd, 1932, declared the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Pretty impressive start, if I do say so myself. But we're just getting started, because up next, we're diving deep into what this country has to offer. So Saudi Arabia covers about and 30,000 square miles, which is about 2.15 million square kilometres. It's a lot. Which is why it's no surprise it's considered the largest country in the Middle East, and one of the biggest across all of Asia. With that size, you'd think it'll be jam-packed with interesting landscapes and diverse biospheres. But in reality, it's mostly desert. Though don't let that fool you, because Saudi Arabia isn't one big flat sandbox. It's actually got layers, and in a few seconds we're going to peel it one by one. Starting from the west. Along the Red Sea, you'll find a narrow coastal plain called the Tihahmur. The way I would describe it is that it's hot, flat, and it's hugging the water. Behind it there's the Hejaz and Usir mountain ranges that are topping out at around 12,000 feet, roughly 3,600 metres in the south near Yemen. Then moving on to the southwestern corner, that's where the Usir is. It gets more rainfall than anywhere else in the country. And one thing about this place is that it probably looks nothing like how you picture Saudi Arabia in your head. Terraced farms, juniper forests, cool mountain air. I mean, those are the exact opposite things of what a normal desert is, which is why I love this place so much. From there, let's travel east and we'll land onto the Nejd. This is the historical heartland of the Al Saud dynasty. Why? For one, Riyadh sits here. But besides that, its landscape alternates between gravel plains, rocky outcrops, and something called the edge of the world, which, if we put it simply, is just a cliff face stretching hundreds of miles. And you don't really see where it ends, so steer clear from that. Instead, keep going east and you'll hit the empty quarter, aka the Rub al Khali. This is the largest continuous sand desert on the planet. I'm talking 550,000 square kilometres, or over 210,000 square miles of dunes, some even rising over 650 feet, or 200 metres tall, with virtually no rainfall for years at a time. That's why almost nothing lives here. Up north, that's where you'll find another desert. This time it's called Narfood Desert, and it stretches across seas of deep red sand. Remember the wall of sand we talked about earlier? You know, the one that keeps invaders out. Well, as it turns out, there's a corridor of dunes in Narfood called Dana that connects all the way south back to the empty quarter. In other words, it wraps around the entire country's centre like a natural fortress. So given what we already know about this country, like the fact that it's surrounded by sand or the fact that it houses the largest continuous desert on Earth, it's no surprise that they have a serious water situation. AKA, water is a major scarcity here, so much so that Saudi Arabia has 0 permanent rivers. What it has instead are wadis, dry riverbeds that occasionally flood during rare storms, then go silent again. So you're probably wondering, how are they all surviving? To answer that, all fresh water comes from either ancient underground aquifers, which are basically massive, ancient deep earth water reserves trapped in the rocks, or from over 30 desalination plants along the coasts, which, when we put 2 and 2 together, produce more than 5 million cubic metres. That's about 1.3 billion gallons of fresh water every single day. But let's be honest, besides the desert landscape, there's one other thing we associate with Saudi Arabia, and that's oil, lots of it. For most of the 20th century, oil was more than a backbone of the Saudi economy. It basically was the entire economy, accounting for around 90% of government revenues and nearly half of the GDP. Sure, for a while that was fine. Oil prices went up, money poured in, cities got built, and the kingdom became the largest economy in the Middle East. But here's the problem. Eventually putting all your bets into one basket is not going to work in your favour. That's the basic probability principle. In this case, oil prices can crash, geopolitical tensions can flare, and if you don't have any backup, you're practically a goner. Luckily, the Saudi government saw it all coming. So in 2016, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman launched Vision 2030. It's a sweeping plan to wean the country off oil dependency, open it up to foreign investment, build a tourism industry almost from scratch, and create an economy diverse enough to survive whatever happens to crude prices. And let me tell you, the results, at least on paper, are pretty impressive. In 2025, Saudi Arabia's GDP had reached $1.31 trillion. Foreign direct investment hit $35.5 billion, which was nearly 5 times the figure in 2017. And tourism brought in 123 million visitors. But as great as that sounds, 2026 is a different story. Regional conflict disrupted shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. meaning oil output got squeezed and GDP growth slowed to around 3% in the first quarter of the year. Yeah, it's not looking great. The silver lining, though, is that the non-oil economy is still pretty strong. So even with all these problems regarding oil, finance, manufacturing, and services sectors are growing, unemployment is falling, and inflation is low. Forecasters even expect growth to rebound to around 4.3 to 4.5% in 2027 once the regional situation stabilises. So it's not all bad, and if you want to contribute to their economy in your own way, the easiest solution is to visit it. I know that being stuck in a desert country can be nerve-wracking, but with the help of a travel-safe VPN and a custom trip planner, you'll be good to go. The links to those, by the way, are in the description below. But don't just take my word for it. Before booking your flight here, you also need to ask yourself, besides money and power, what's actually left to experience when I land in Saudi Arabia? Turns out, a lot. Start in Diriyah. It's the same mud-brick streets where the entire Saudi dynasty was born. Today it's a living heritage district, complete with restaurants, galleries and guided walks through restored palaces. If you ask me, it's basically the origin story of the country, and you'd be missing out if you don't add this to your itinerary. On that note, want to know another must-visit spot? That'll be Jeddah's Al Balad district. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site with coral stone buildings that have stood for centuries, and it's right on the Red Sea. So just imagine, you can float around in the morning and then walk through a 500-year-old market in the afternoon. Where else can you think of doing that? Besides the locations though, another thing that attracts tourists from all over the world is the culture. For instance, festivals like Sukokars host poetry competitions where the top winner can take home nearly $100,000 just for a single poem. Can you believe that? Apparently here, a well-crafted poem carries serious weight. And if I could, I'd join that competition in a heartbeat. Otherwise, you could entertain yourself with other things, like watching the national dance. It's called Ahlar Da, and it's performed with swords and drums. But it's not all tradition here. Believe it or not, in the same city there are underground music scenes, contemporary art galleries, and Saudi designers putting ancient weaving techniques on products people are buying online worldwide. And yet none of this fits the version of Saudi Arabia most people picture, which I think is the icing on top. Sure, you'll come here for the sights, but you'll eventually stay for the culture. And that's what makes Saudi Arabia so unique and worth travelling to. So if you enjoyed this video, you'll love this next one.